Before we begin, I need to ask you for one small favor. After you click subscribe, I want you to leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from. It matters more than you know. What I am about to tell you was not just classified, it was systematically erased, a truth deemed too dangerous, too reality-shattering for public knowledge. For over a decade, I lived a lie, wearing a uniform and a badge that served as a disguise for my real purpose. I wasn't protector of the wilderness. I was a jailer. My job was to guard a perimeter around a place where the rules of our world have broken down, where time itself is fractured, and where something ancient and incomprehensible has been conducting a silent, century-long harvest. This is my confession. This is the truth about the quarantine zone, the phenomenon known as a loop, and the terrible price of seeing what lies beyond the markers. If you're ready, I'll begin that my name is Lucas Hale. For 12 years, I told people I was a senior Forest Service agent for the Department of the Interior, stationed in the remote, rain-drenched forests of the Pacific Northwest. The story was that I managed wildlife, prevented fires, and assisted lost hikers. It was a good story, a noble one. People would nod with respect. But every morning, when I clipped that polished badge to my vest, I felt the weight of the deception. It was an anchor, not a symbol of honor. I wasn't a guardian of nature. I was the guardian of a secret. A secret the Pentagon buried in 1989. A secret with perimeter, fence lines, and a designation. Sector Bravo 7. The lie began, as they often do, with a personal collapse. I was 34. My life in Seattle, a career in logistics, a marriage, a future, had disintegrated into quiet, painful fragments. I needed to vanish, to find a purpose in solitude. When the job posting appeared, it seemed like a salvation. It promised deep woods isolation, a government salary with hazard pay, and vague duties listed under specialized terrain management and monitoring. The background investigation was unlike anything I had experienced. It wasn't just about my record. It probed my psychology, my childhood, my beliefs about the unexplained. In my desperation, I saw it as thoroughness, not profiling. My induction into the truth was a man named Carl Henderson. He met me at a dusty depot, a figure who seemed less a man and more a feature of the landscape, like a weathered stone outcrop. His face was a map of hard years, and his eyes held a stillness that felt less like peace and more like a deep, permanent exhaustion. He spoke little during the long drive in his battered Ford pickup, offering only the basic radio protocols and fire safety procedures. The forest swallowed us, the road dwindling to a track, and then to something not on any map. It was then his demeanor changed. The casual instructor vanished. His hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles pale. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice low, cutting to the rumble of the engine. "You're about to see the boundary. What I show you does not exist. You will never speak it on an open channel. You will never mark it on a map. And if anyone asks, you have no idea what they're talking about. Your career and more depend on this." We stopped. He pointed. They were subtle. Brushed steel stakes no higher than my knee, painted a matte gray-green that seemed to drink the light. A small stamp number was visible only up close. Marker 01, we spent 2 hours driving a ragged perimeter. Marker 12, Marker 18, Marker 23. They formed a rough, irregular circle encompassing nearly 10 square miles of the densest old-growth forest I'd ever seen. The air itself felt different here, quieter, as if the birds and insects avoided the space. "What's in there, Carl?" I finally asked, the question hanging in the stale cab air. He didn't answer immediately. He fished a cigarette from a crumpled pack, a habit he'd told me he'd quit a decade prior. The flame of his lighter trembled slightly. "Officially," he said, exhaling smoke. "Toxic residue. Experimental munitions from the late Cold War. The ground is poisoned. That's the story. You stick to it." He took another drag, the ember glowing in the deepening gloom. Unofficially, something happened here in the autumn of '89. Something that caused a rapid deployment force from Fort Lewis to lock this grid down and evacuate within 48 hours. They didn't do remediation. They didn't attempt cleanup. They established this perimeter, erased every trace of the access roads from civilian surveys, and created our jobs. Our sole mission, Lucas, is not to manage that land. It is to ensure that nothing, and I mean nothing, comes out of it, and that no one, no matter how lost or curious, ever goes in. He left me at my cabin, a solitary structure just outside the marked boundary. My mind raced with the cynical conclusion. This was an elaborate hazing, a test for the new recruit. That theory lasted until nightfall. In the dead silence, I found the locked filing box in the bottom drawer of the battered desk. The key was taped underneath. Inside were not routine forms, but a legacy of fear. A heavily redacted department of the Army memorandum authorizing permanent non-standard quarantine. Then the logbooks, dozens of them, cheap notebooks filled with entries in different hands, some steady, some frantic, spanning from 1990 to the present week. The entries were a crescendo of the impossible. June 1994. Recurring audio anomaly near marker 15. Sounds mimic squad-level radio traffic. No transmission source found. October 2001. Pattern of boot prints, size 11, standard issue. Observed leading from marker 09 into the sector. No returning prints. Search team authorized. Request denied. Per protocol Hydra. March 2012. Game camera at marker 31 triggered 54 times between 0100 and 0400. All images show same spectral figure. Image analysis indicates uniform anachronisms. Mixture of WW2 and modern web gear. This was no hazing ritual. This was a documented, ongoing phenomenon. My government salary was a paycheck for silence, for guarding a mystery. I was the night watchman at a door that shouldn't exist. And as I sat there, the forest outside my window pitch black, I heard the first distant, distorted crackle of what would become known to me as the loop. It sounded like a voice desperately repeating a broken phrase. "Can't hold the line. They are in the trees." The loop became the soundtrack to my life in Sector Bravo 7. Within my first fortnight, I heard it a dozen times. It never manifested in the same way twice. Sometimes it was a faint, almost musical distortion on the edge of hearing during a daytime patrol. Other times, on still nights, it would flood the forest near a specific marker, a cacophony of overlapping voices, static, and digital squeals that felt like a psychic assault. Carl, in one of our rare, frank conversations on a smoke-filled porch, gave it its name. "It's not a broadcast," he explained, staring into the woods. "It's an echo, a scar. Whatever happened in '89 didn't just kill people. It recorded them. It imprinted the event onto the location itself, like a phonograph needle cutting into reality. The loop is that recording, playing back on a frequency we can sometimes perceive. Through repeated exposure, I learned to distinguish voices in the chaos. There was Sergeant Miller, whose tone was calm, professional, but underpinned by a terrifying urgency. Private Vance, younger, his voice often cracking with strain. And Captain Briggs, whose commands were sharp, decisive, but increasingly frayed at the edges. Their dialogue was a fragmented, terrifying play. They spoke of maintaining a perimeter, of falling back to a primary objective, and always, they reported contact with the fractured. Carl's theory, offered reluctantly, was temporal displacement. He believed the sector was a wound in time, a place where past, present, and future bled together. The fractured were those caught in the bleed, out of phase with their own moment. I dismissed it as the paranoid folklore of isolated men. My skepticism was armor, and I clung to it until the day at Marker 14. It was a crisp, clear dawn. I was conducting a routine boundary check. The mist was burning off the ferns, and the world felt normal, sane. Then I saw him, 30 yards inside the line, standing motionless between two towering hemlocks. A man in desert-pattern camouflage. The uniform faded and torn at the knees. His skin was the color of cold ash. He was staring not at me, but at a point in the empty air before him, his eyes wide with a horror, so profound it seemed to have frozen his features into a permanent mask. This was no hallucination. He cast a shadow. My training kicked in. "Sir," I called, my voice too loud in the silent forest. "You are in a restricted, hazardous area. You need to exit immediately and follow me to safety." No response. Not a blink, not a twitch. He was a statue of dread. Then, with a sudden, jerky motion that was utterly inhuman, he turned his head towards me. Our eyes met. In that gray, depthless gaze, I saw nothing resembling human thought, only an infinite, screaming panic. He then turned his body and walked. Not a run, not a stumble, but a deliberate, mechanical stride directly away from me, deeper into the heart of the sector. He moved through thick undergrowth without seeming to notice it, fading into the gloom. My hands were shaking as I radioed Carl. "Contact. Civilian or something. Inside the line at Marker 14. Male, military appearance, non-responsive. He's proceeding inward." The silence on the channel was long enough to make me check my connection. When Carl's voice came, it was flat, drained. Description. I gave it. Approximate height, build, the desert camo. Another pause. "That's Sergeant Miller," Carl said, the words heavy with a grim finality. "He's been sighted 43 times since 1992. Always at uniform. Always that location. Always walking the same bearing." I protested. "That's impossible. The same man for 30 years. He's not a man," Carl interrupted, his voice a low growl. "Not anymore. He's recording in flesh. A moment of terror. Preserved. We call them echoes. Don't follow him. Just log it. Standard protocol." Shaken, I retreated to the cabin and tore through the hidden files with new purpose. I found the photographic evidence. A cheerful, sun-drenched snapshot dated March 10th, 1989. 6 young soldiers, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling in front of a Humvee. I recognized Miller and Vance instantly. The captain, Briggs, stood proudly in the center. The next photo, stamped March 15th, 1989, was a horror. It was the same group, in nearly the same position, but now in a dim, wooded setting. Their smiles were gone. Their faces were contorted, mouths open in silent screams, eyes bulging with an identical, primal fear I had just witnessed hours before. Their skin had a waxy, lifeless sheen. It was a before and after of damnation. Beneath the photos was a final, formal incident report. The conclusion was chillingly bureaucratic. All personnel accounted for except 6, see attached list. Condition of recovered subjects inconsistent with known biological processes. Recommend permanent closure of the sector, Grid Bravo 7, and establishment of ongoing passive monitoring. No further recovery or investigative missions are to be authorized. The last line, handwritten in the margin by someone who had clearly lost all professional detachment, read, "We opened a door we were never meant to find." God help them. That night, the loop didn't stay in the forest. I was reviewing maps when my personal radio, which was switched off, crackled to life on the table. Briggs's voice came through, clearer than ever, laced with desperation that felt immediate. "They are not what we thought. The fractured are not hostile. They're us from... The transmission dissolved into a shriek of static. Then a new voice, calm, close, and intimately direct, filled the small cabin. Lucas. It was Miller's voice, but without the echo, without the distortion. It sounded like he was standing beside me. We see you. We've been waiting for you. Come find us. The radio died. The room was silent. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The echo knew my name. The secret in the woods was no longer a passive phenomenon. It was aware, and it was calling for me. The next morning, Carl arrived early. He didn't ask about my night. He simply placed a thin personnel file on the table in front of me. It was my own. Sections were highlighted. My psych evaluation. Subject demonstrates elevated resilience to cognitive dissonance and high tolerance for anomalous sensory data. My childhood medical records, noting episodes of perceived auditory phenomena and night terrors involving non-standard figures. A recommendation from an unseen reviewer. Ideal candidate for Grid Bravo. 7 monitoring detail. Pre-adapted for environmental stressors. Carl looked at me, his expression unreadable. They didn't just hire a ranger, Lucas. They selected a specific psychological profile. They needed someone who wouldn't break immediately, someone whose mind was already porous. You're not a victim of circumstance. You were recruited for this. The revelation that I was a chosen component of the lie, not its accidental victim, changed everything. The forest no longer felt like my workplace. It felt like a predestined trap. I moved through my patrols like an automaton, the weight of Carl's disclosure crushing my last vestiges of normalcy. The loop's voices now felt personalized, their broken transmissions seeming to track my movements. The sense of being watched was no longer paranoia. It was a confirmed, dreadful fact. The catalyst came 3 days later. During a storm damage survey, I found marker 22 missing, not knocked over, gone. The soil where the steel stake had been driven was fresh, disturbed, as if it had been pulled straight out. And leading from that spot, directly into the quarantine zone, was a set of clear, deep boot prints. They were recent, made after the previous night's rain. This was a breach. A living, breathing person had entered Bravo 7. My duty, my ingrained protocol, screamed at me to call it in, to let the sterile machinery of standard procedure engage. But another voice, the one that had heard Miller call its name, argued. What if it was a lost hiker, confused and terrified? What if they were alive in there, facing what Miller and his men had faced? The bureaucratic ghost in the file said I was resilient. I decided to test that resilience. I told myself I would just go in far enough to confirm the entrance direction, to shout a warning. It was a lie I needed to believe to take the first step over the invisible line where marker 22 should have stood. The change was instantaneous and profound. It was not a subtle shift in atmosphere. It was a violent transition into another world. One moment, I was in the cool, damp, sun-dappled forest. The next, I was enveloped in a cold, so deep it felt like a physical slap. My breath plumed in thick, white clouds. The light didn't vanish, but it changed quality, becoming a dull, directionless gray, like the sky had been replaced with a low, featureless ceiling. Sound died. The rustle of the wind, the distant chatter of birds, the crunch of my own boots on a forest floor, all were swallowed by a thick, oppressive silence. The air felt heavy, resistant, as if I were moving through water. The boot prints were clear in the soft, mossy earth. I followed them, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The forest around me was the same, yet utterly alien. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches twisted into agonized shapes. The colors were leached out, everything rendered in shades of gray, green, and brown. I tracked the prints for what my watch later told me was 200 yards, though it felt like miles. Then They simply stopped. Not at a log, not at a stream. In the middle of a flat patch of moss. The impression of a right boot was deep and clear. The left boot's print, the next step forward, did not exist. It was as if the person had taken that right step and then ceased to exist mid-stride. There was no scuffle, no sign of a struggle or a change of direction. The trail ended in a definitive, impossible full stop. A wave of primal nausea washed over me. Carl's words echoed. Reality is already forgetting him. That's when the temperature dropped again. A fog, cold and smelling of ozone and damp earth, began to coil around the bases of the trees. From within this mist, 3 figures solidified. They didn't step out from behind trees. They seemed to coalesce from the fog itself, their forms flickering like a poor hologram. Sergeant Miller, Private Vance, and a third man I recognized from the photo as Corporal Reyes. Their ash-gray faces were turned towards me, those wide, horror-filled eyes now focused with an unsettling intensity. "You should not be here, Lucas Hale." Miller's voice didn't come from his mouth. It resonated in the air around me, layered with a faint echo. "Your time is not yet." I saw the tracks. I managed to say, my own voice small in the dead air, "Someone came in here. I want to help." Corporal Reyes made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. "Help? We are beyond help. We know exactly where we are. That is our curse. We are perfectly, eternally aware of our location within the cage." They began to speak, their voices overlapping, not in chaos, but in a practiced, tragic chorus, recounting their end. A routine patrol in October 1989. A missing private. A search that led them to a depression in the land, hidden by fallen logs. Not a natural formation, a crafted concrete rim. A hatch, old military issue, but without markings. Against standing orders, driven by a commander's curiosity and the soldiers' need to find their lost brother, Captain Briggs opened it. A shaft descended into darkness. At the bottom, not a bunker, but a door. "It was not of our making," Vance whispered, his flickering image trembling. The metal, it was cold in a way that stole heat from the air. The symbols on it, they moved when you didn't look directly. Briggs opened the door. There was no sound, Miller intoned, only a thickening. The air became syrup. Time became solid. And in the room beyond, we saw the gathering. They described ranks of soldiers, standing at attention in perfect, silent rows. Doughboys from the Argonne, Marines from Iwo Jima, grunts from Hugh, all in their period uniforms, all with the same frozen expression of catastrophic revelation that now adorned the faces of Miller's team. They were not dead, Reyes said. They had been extracted, removed from the flow of time, and placed here, in this waiting room. Their consciousness stretched across every second of their imprisonment, and when we saw them, the door recognized us. It added us to the collection. They spoke of the caches we had logged, the old rifles, helmets, canteens, not as lost equipment, but as markers, nodes in a vast, invisible pattern. "A cage," Vance repeated, his voice breaking. "Not to keep something in, but to focus it, to aim it. This place is a lens, and the artifact below is the focal point. The Army doesn't just know. They have been studying it since at least the First World War. They think they can control the process. They believe they can weaponize removal." Miller's image stabilized slightly, his terrifying eyes locking onto mine. "You are different, Lucas. Your mind, it resonates on a frequency the artifact can perceive. You can see us clearly. That means it can see you clearly. You are now a person of interest to something that has no concept of personhood, only a collection. They told me of Marker 47, the true epicenter of documents hidden there by a researcher who understood too late. The truth is buried there, Miller said. Retrieve it, then decide. Will you be another ward of the lie, or will you be the one who speaks the truth, no matter the cost? As they spoke, their forms began to diffuse back into the mist. Reyes was the last to fade. As he dissolved, his final words hung in the cold air, a warning that chilled me deeper than the temperature. The man you followed, his timeline has been severed. His past is unraveling. Soon he will never have been. That is the true function of this place. It does not kill. It unmakes. I stumbled back across the boundary, the return to normal temperature and sound feeling like a violent rebirth. I was vomiting from shock when Carl found me. I told him everything. He listened in silence, his face a stone mask. When I finished, he simply said, "Marker 47, I've mapped the cache coordinates for a decade. They form a spiral. It ends there. We go at first light." Carl arrived at my cabin before dawn. He carried no standard issue gear. Instead, he had an old leather satchel containing topographical maps annotated with dense, handwritten notes, a compass that looked like a WW2 relic, and a large, rubberized flashlight. His sidearm was an old, well-maintained Colt 1911.45 caliber. Modern electronics act as a beacon in there, he explained tersely. Steel attracts attention. This, he patted the Colt, is from a time before the artifact sensors were tuned. It's quieter. His preparedness was terrifying. He had been waiting for this, perhaps for years. We hiked in silence as the sky lightened to a pale gray. The familiar markers, 14, 19, 26, passed by, each one feeling like a sentinel we were betraying. The air grew colder with each step, the silence more profound. Carl navigated with a grim certainty, consulting his maps only occasionally. "The caches aren't random," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Each one corresponds to a disappearance, not just from 89, from 1918, 1944, 1951, 1968, a perfect mathematical progression. It's a timeline of theft." After 2 hours of hiking through the increasingly distorted landscape, where trees seemed to mirror each other in perfect, unnatural symmetry, and streams ran with water that was still and black as oil, we found it. Marker 47. It was unlike the others. It was taller, thicker, made of a dark, pitted metal that wasn't steel. It was covered not just with number, but with tiny, etched markings that swirl like cursive in a language of angles. Around it, arranged in a rough circle, was the motherlode of the caches, helmets from the Great War piled next to Vietnam-era flak jackets. A Civil War-era canteen rested against a modern Kevlar plate. It was a museum of American conflict, discarded at the center of a silent forest. 50 yards southeast, exactly as the echoes had said, was the hatch. It was set into a rocky outcrop, disguised by a masterful camouflage of native moss and ferns, but the straight lines and rivets gave it away. It was massive, circular, and made from the same dark, non-reflective metal as Marker 47. Carl didn't hesitate. He gripped the recessed wheel and, with a grunt of effort, began to turn it. The mechanism protested with a shriek of metal that was horrifically loud in the silence, then gave way, spinning smoothly. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, the hatch swung inward, revealing a yawning blackness and a fixed metal ladder descending into the earth. The descent was a journey into the belly of the secret. The shaft was lined with smooth, poured concrete, but it was old, cracked, and weeping moisture. A dim, sourceless phosphorescence provided just enough light to see the rungs. We climbed down for what felt like an eternity, the circle of gray sky above shrinking to a coin, then a pinprick, then vanishing. The air grew cold and stale, smelling of whetstone, ozone, and something else, a metallic tang like copper and static. We reached the bottom, a small, circular antechamber, and there, against the wall, was a rectangular case made of thick, molded plastic, sealed with heavy rubber gaskets. Stenciled on the side were the words, Project Sundial, Eyes Only. Carl broke the seal. Inside was a treasure trove of heresy. The documents were the life's work of a Dr. Eris Thorne, a physicist recruited into a black budget program in the late 1970s. Her early notes were excited, clinical. They detailed the discovery of an anomalous quantum field generator of non-human origin, buried at the site, likely by a predecessor culture, or, her later notes suggested, left as a trap. Her language grew increasingly frantic. The artifact is not a tool, she wrote. It is a collector. It perceives linear time as a physical dimension, like height or width. Human consciousness, with its unique experience of duration, is a resource. It harvests that resource, extracting moments of awareness and storing them in a state of quantum stasis. She included diagrams of the Cache pattern, which she called a temporal resonance array. It was designed to amplify the artifact's range, drawing it towards moments of intense dramatic consciousness. Soldiers in combat. Each disappearance is not a loss of life, but a transfer of substrate. The artifact is building something with the harvested moments, a bridge, a structure in a dimension we cannot perceive. When the bridge is complete, when the collected consciousness reaches a critical mass. I was still reeling from this when we heard it, a sound that began as a vibration in the floor, then rose into a deep, rhythmic whoosh, the sound of massive, synchronized breathing. It came from a dark archway on the other side of the antechamber, leading deeper in. Then a voice. It was not a voice as we understand it. It was a chorus of whispers, of clicks, of digital glitches, all layered into a semblance of speech that vibrated in our bones. Aperture confirmed. The collection acknowledges new contributors. Your moments will be appreciated. Above us, with a deafening clang of metal, the ladder we descended began to retract, slamming back into the shaft wall and vanishing upward. We were trapped. Carl's reaction was instantaneous. It's the metals. Shed it all. He tore off his watch, threw down his flashlight, emptied his pockets of keys and coins. I did the same, dumping my radio, my multi-tool. Even the zippers on my vest felt suddenly dangerous. Carl pointed to a narrow, crumbling service tunnel I hadn't noticed. There. Go. We scrambled into the tunnel as the breathing grew louder. Behind us, from a main archway, a light began to grow, a sickly, pulsating green. The tunnel emptied into a vast, cavernous space. And there, I witnessed the impossible. The chamber was larger than any natural geology should allow. Its walls met at angles that hurt to look at. Receding into dimensions my eyes refused to process. And standing in perfect, silent ranks were the collected, hundreds of them, thousands, soldiers from every corner of American history, standing at attention in a nightmare parade. Their collective presence was a pressure on my mind, a silent, screaming hymn of anguish stretched across centuries. Don't look at their eyes. Carl roared. It uses them as lenses. But it was too late. My gaze had swept across the front rank and locked with a Union infantryman. His blue jacket faded, his face a rictus of Gettysburg terror. In that instant of contact, I didn't see him. I felt a presence see through him. It was vast, ancient, and utterly indifferent. It wasn't malicious. It was curious. In a nanosecond, I felt its attention sweep through the entirety of my life. My first memory, my divorce, this very moment, as if flipping through the pages of a book. It was assessing me, cataloging me. I was a specimen under a microscope of impossible scale. We broke the contact and ran, stumbling toward the far end of the chamber where a massive, Soviet-style blast door stood, covered in warning sigils. Carl, panting, fumbled in Thorne's case and pulled out a crude, hand-soldered device with a single button. Thorne's disruptor. The fail-safe is behind that door. It can shatter the artifact's coherence, but we have to reach it. As he spoke, the ranks of soldiers behind us turned in unison, thousands of heads swiveling with a single, fluid motion. They began to march forward, their boots striking the stone in a perfect, world-ending rhythm. The synchronized march of the collective was a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the soul, a dread heartbeat made manifest. Carl didn't hesitate. He slammed his thumb onto the button of the crude device. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and the massive vault door shuddered. Ancient hydraulics, untouched for decades, groaned in protest. With a shriek of tortured metal, the door began to inch inward, revealing a blinding, wrong light from within. 60 seconds. Carl yelled over the din, shoving Thorne's notes into my hands. He drew his antique revolver, not aiming at the advancing army, but at the crumbling concrete supports of the chamber ceiling. "I'll buy you time. Go." I stumbled through the opening into the heart of the nightmare. The chamber beyond was small, but its dimensions were fluid, impossible to fix. In its center, suspended in midair without visible support, was the artifact. Hourglass was the closest my mind had come to describing it. It consisted of two shifting, translucent spheres connected by a wavering nexus. But it wasn't made of glass or any known material. Its surface was a constantly moving tapestry of non-Euclidean geometry, of shapes that existed in more than 3 dimensions, glowing with an internal light that cast no shadows. Inside, instead of sand, were countless points of shimmering light, each one a captured moment of human consciousness, a scream, a prayer of final thought, falling with infinite slowness from the upper sphere to the nearly full lower one. The sight was beautiful and profoundly violating. Carl's gunshots rang out behind me, sharp and final in the vast space, followed by the roar of collapsing stone as he brought down part of the tunnel entrance. I tore my eyes from the artifact and looked at Thorne's final page. The instructions were clear, written in a shaking hand. Resonant frequency disruptor sequence. Input the Fibonacci progression at the control terminal. The pattern of life is the key to undoing this perversion of time. A simple, numeric keypad was set into a console of the same dark metal. The march had stopped. From the dust cloud where Carl had made a stand, a single figure emerged, walking with that same wrong purpose. It was Miller, but his body was now a conduit. That ancient choral voice spoke from him. The pattern is complete. The bridge is formed. The collector comes to appreciate the totality of your sequence. Resistance is a beautiful, fleeting dissonance. My hands flew over the keypad. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. As I pressed the final key, the artifact emitted a deep harmonic hum that I felt in my teeth, in my bones. For a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, nothing changed. The points of light continued their slow, terrible fall. Then a crack appeared in the lower sphere. Not a physical crack, but a fissure in reality itself. The hum rose to a deafening, pure tone. The light within the artifact intensified from a glow to a supernova of impossible colors. The stored moment inside began to shatter, not like glass, but like ice melting in reverse, unraveling into streams of golden light that spiraled upwards. And with their release, the collected soldiers cried out, It was a sound of ultimate release, a chorus of every pain they had ever held, finally given voice. I watched as Miller, Vance, Reyes, and all the others, the Union soldier, the doughboys, the Vietnam grunts, began to fade. Their rigid, terror-stricken forms softened, the horror melting from their faces, replaced by expressions of profound, weary peace. They became transparent, then shimmering outlines of light, then memories absorbed back into the air. Miller was the last. He turned his now gentle gaze to me, and for the first time he smiled. His voice, now his own, quiet and clear, whispered a single word: free. Then he was gone. The artifact imploded, not with a bang, but with a sound like a sigh. The impossible light winked out. The shifting geometry collapsed, and where the hourglass had hung, a few shards of inert, dark crystal clattered to the now ordinary stone floor. The chamber snapped into focus. A small, concrete room, empty and cold. I found Carl on the other side of the rubble, partially buried. He was still alive, but fading fast. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "You saw them go?" he whispered, blood at the corner of his mouth. I nodded. "Good," he breathed. "Then it's done. For this one place, it's done." His grip tightened. "But it's not over, Lucas. Thorne," she suspected others. "This can't be the only lens." His eyes glazed, looking past me. "Don't let them make you another keeper of the quiet." And then he was gone. Carl Henderson, who had carried the truth for a generation, died in the silence he had helped maintain. The latter had returned. I climbed back to the world alone. I filed the official report. Ranger Henderson lost in a rockfall during a routine survey. A tragic accident. The sector remained closed, its signs unchanged. I resigned my commission a month later. The badge I mailed back felt like it weighed a ton. But Carl was right. It wasn't over. The silence after the artifact destruction was replaced by a new noise, the whispers of others like me. Using Thorne's notes and the patterns she described, I began to search, and I found them. Online forums for people with false memories of wars they never fought. Geomagnetic anomaly maps that correlated with historic military disappearance clusters. I made contact. A woman in Korea who experienced flashbacks to the Chosin Reservoir. A man in Germany haunted by Stalingrad. We called ourselves the Marked. Together, we pieced together a global map. Not one site. 17. Pine Gap, the Bermuda Triangle, the Diet Law Pass region. Sites where governments quietly maintained environmental research stations. We learned the terrible truth. The Global Initiative, a consortium of superpowers, knew about them all. Project Sundial had been internationalized. They weren't trying to destroy the artifacts. They were trying to understand, to control, to weaponize the process of temporal removal. The final, synchronized countdown across all 17 sites wasn't to stop the collector. It was to activate the bridges simultaneously, a show of force in a dimension we cannot see. The deadline, December 31st, 2025. And I learned something worse from a fragment of Thorne's journal I'd missed. Her final, despairing entry. I have misunderstood the paradigm. The collector is not coming. It has always been here. Linear time is not the baseline reality. It is a phenomenon. We are not being harvested from a stable world. We are grains already within the hourglass, experiencing our fall in sequence. The artifacts aren't invasion points. They are awakening points. The countdown is the moment the grain becomes aware of the glass. This is the truth that is unmaking me. I am no longer just Lucas Hale. I am Private Vance's fear at the hatch. I am the Union soldiers cold at Gettysburg. Past and future moments bleed into my present. I am becoming a junction, a bridge myself. On New Year's Eve, the Mark will launch a coordinated strike on all 17 sites. Our mission is not salvation. How do you save what is already preserved? Our mission is to shatter the glass on the inside, to regain the mercy of ignorance, to fall through time without knowing we are falling. If you are hearing this, and your life feels like a straight line from birth to this moment, perhaps we succeeded. Or perhaps you are simply a grain that hasn't looked up yet. If you start to remember the smell of cordite from a war you never served in, if you flinch at the sound of a helicopter that isn't there, listen to me. Get away from old battlefields. Avoid decommissioned bases. Do not dig into local disappearance myths. You've been noticed. And once the collector's attention is on you, it never, ever looks away. This is Lucas Hale. I wore a Forest Service badge for 12 years. I am now a grain of sand that has glimpsed the hourglass. In 3 months, I will join the final attempt to break it. This recording is my testament, my warning, and my confession, sent out into a world I can no longer trust is real. If this story has resonated with you, if it has made the walls of your reality feel just a little thinner, then I need you to do something for me. First, and most importantly, hit the like button on this video. In an algorithm-driven world, that single click is a signal. It tells the platform that content like this, content that challenges, that questions, that seeks hidden truths, has value. It helps this channel, Winds of Thought, reach others who are searching for pieces of the same puzzle. You're like ensures these stories don't vanish back into the silence. Secondly, I want you to engage. The comment section is not just a void. It is a gathering place. I asked you at the beginning to tell me where you are listening from. Please do that. But go further. Share your experience. What is the strangest, most inexplicable thing you have ever witnessed in a remote place? Have you ever felt a sudden, profound sense of dislocation, as if you were momentarily out of time? Have your family stories hinted at mysteries involving missing persons or odd government interests in specific patches of land? Your comment might be the crucial data point that connects someone else's fragment of the truth. By sharing, we build a map that exists outside of official control. And finally, subscribe. By subscribing to Winds of Thought, you are not just passively consuming content. You are joining a community of the curious. You are raising your hand and saying, I am willing to look. This channel is dedicated to piecing together the hidden history of our world, to exploring the gaps in the official narrative, and to giving voice to stories that were meant to be buried. Every new subscriber strengthens this network, making it harder for the truth to be quarantined ever again. The journey does not end with this video. This is merely one report from the edge. There are other testimonies, other locations, other mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Your engagement, your likes, your comments, your subscription fuels that investigation. It tells me and others like me that we are not speaking into a void, that there are people who are ready to listen, to question, and to remember. So take action now. Before you move on to the next distraction, before the comfortable illusion of normalcy reasserts itself, make your mark. Hit like, write where you're from and what you've seen in the comments, and hit subscribe to Winds of Thought. Together, we can keep the search for truth alive. The clock is ticking. December 31st is coming. What we do between now and then, the connections we make, the truths we share, might just change everything. Or it might simply make the final moments of awareness, before the sand runs out, mean something. The choice now is yours.